And welcome to Handmade Hero, show where we have to connect dungeons to the main area because otherwise no one will ever get there. So we've gotten to the point in Handmade Hero, which I've lamented many times and said sucks, but at some point you can only delay for so long. And so we are having to do game design. There is nothing left really for us to do. There was like one thing with sound to put it on a separate thread I think we could do, but we're really kind of out of things to do that don't involve either game design or like at least the part where you like make effects or things to complement the game design. And so one of the things that we have to do here is generate levels, make some kind of an argument as to why these levels are generated the way that they are. Not being game designers, we're not holding ourselves to a particularly high standard here. We're just doing it. And as long as we do it, then we have succeeded. So what we did is we shrunk the world back down to a single starting room, which you can see here. And on last stream, we then did a thing to try and generate locations of dungeons that would randomly generate and be placed in positions that were sort of a reasonable distance away from where you started, always in the direction of the forest, because we don't want the game to take place, like we want you to believe you're on the edge of a forest, so the all of the levels and stuff have to kind of happen out further. And so that they would never be too close to each other was the other criteria that we put on the generator. And so we can generate as many of these as we want. In fact, if we like stop and relaunch, like just basically ask the game to regenerate, it generates a different set. And we have the ability to generate different numbers of them, obviously, as well. So, it's just very simple, basic things, right? And now, what we want to be able to do before we start generating the dungeon areas is we need to generate some idea of how the screens connect so that you can get to the dungeons. Now, one of the things that, again, not being game designer, it's difficult for me to really quite understand, and I brought up, so one of the things that I showed last time on the stream when we were talking about this just as a touch point, because I don't actually, I don't know really, again, not doing game design for a living, it's hard for me to articulate many of these things. But if we take a look at, for example, a map of the original Legend of Zelda, which I had brought up on the previous stream, this right here, you can see how the dungeons are placed, and there are a couple of things that we discussed and sort of had a general idea. Again, we're just kind of go by intuition on the game design. My understanding is that good game designers, they do refine things by experiencing them as well. So it's not like we don't have to come up with all the answers right away. So we're just kind of trying to come up with a first pass idea of like what we're going for. The dungeons in something like the original Legend of Zelda are placed because they are sort of meant to be experienced roughly in order. And you can see here how you have like dungeon number 1, dungeon number 3, and dungeon number 2 are the closer things. 4 requires a raft to get to. 8 is one of the closer, higher level dungeons, but again, it's hidden. So you'd have to have a candle to get to it. There's one that requires a whistle, right? So really, it's set up to sort of bias you towards hitting one of those early level dungeons first, which makes perfect sense in a game like Legend of Zelda, which is sort of constructed to increase in difficulty by dungeon. Now, when we talked about this on the previous stream, I pointed out the fact that I don't know that I really want to go that route. And I said I think what I'd rather do is make it so that dungeons themselves get harder as you go down. So you can always decide to leave a dungeon and maybe you're sort of expecting to kind of go down further into dungeons. Like, maybe the idea is you would oftentimes visit several dungeons and do only a few floors in those dungeons before returning to try and do harder floors. Right? So that was kind of my thinking about how that might work, which is a departure from the Zelda standard, which is why these all tend to be sort of randomly in a band that's not particularly different. There are not going to be like hard dungeons that are far away and easier dungeons that are close. There's just going to be dungeons that are all relatively within traversal distance of the main starting area. Now, this is where we get to what we're going to do today, and it requires us thinking through one other aspect of how the game will work. When you go through the overworld to get to these dungeons, what are you doing, right? And we kind of know what's going to happen in dungeons to a certain degree, but what is happening above ground? So when you're in the forest, I feel like we want something happening in the forest, gameplay-wise, so that you're not literally just walking around for no reason, randomly stumbling onto a dungeon, doing the dungeon, and then randomly stumbling around again. It would be nice if you had some, like if there was a mental sort of, if there was some activity you were doing in your brain mentally to try and play the overworld. That doesn't really happen in Zelda per se. So in the original Legend of Zelda, which is the closest touchstone I can think of, there aren't a lot of games that have overworlds that are interesting in an exploratory sense. Elden Ring might be one, which I haven't played yet. I probably should play Elden Ring. It seemed like that might be one that actually does. But I don't know, right? For our purposes, when you were walking around in Legend of Zelda, there's really no rhyme or reason to it. You just kind of walk places, and to the extent that you're using the overworld to do anything logically, one of the things that you're doing is you are reading cues from how difficult it is. So, for example, the brown parts on the map are typically more challenging than the green parts. The graveyard is more challenging as well, right? And so when you're going through, you might be less likely to push forward in an area of the map where you are being challenged more until you get better or something, right? So a little of that is happening. But to me, that's not that interesting. Like, that is, again, more of just this, like, cluing into the player that maybe this area is harder, which doesn't really feel like much of a choice. It does allow them to gate the difficulty themselves, which I think is cool, but I'm not really sure I care all that much, right? So what I would like to do is figure out a way to make the outer world area have at least some idea in it that is why you would care about how you are traversing things. Oh, let me answer the question in chat. If you think C++ is bad and C better, why don't you just use C and C++? I do. I basically just use C. That is why I don't. That's why you don't really see me typing in any C++. I just use C. I still use a C++ compiler because I liked when I said 99% of it's bad, or I think I said 90% of it's bad. I probably should have said 99%. There are one or two things I like. I like operator overloading for math. So I do think there's like one thing or something that I use. I also use a function name overloading sometimes, so I don't have to think about new names for functions that do the same thing. But that's about it. So I guess what I would say is I need some kind of theme for the overworld that makes it so that there's a reason why you're doing what you're doing here. That's not just blindly walking around looking for dungeons. Not that that's the end of the world, but I feel like we should give it at least some thought. And how we want that to feel would affect how I choose to connect them up. Because there's many ways we could connect them up. I mean, we could connect them up as if they're just basically straight lines to the dungeon with very little interconnectivity. We could connect them up so it's very meandering and there's lots of interconnectivity and it's easy to get lost, right? We could connect them up in routes so that they go in an order, or there's different orders you could pick. So there's many ways we can choose to have the generator now connect these things up, right? But unfortunately, in order to pick something, we would need to know what we're trying to achieve here. And so I was thinking you're going to encounter enemies on the overworld map. That's just something that I would like to have happen, right? So I was thinking, is there something I can do with this that's the player can kind of control a little bit how the overworld evolves in a way, right? So one thing I thought was what if there's something of the form areas. Suppose we introduce a reason why you have to clear monsters from an area, right? Maybe, for example, in order to really get past a particular thing, there's generators in the forest that generate monsters. And it generates enough monsters that it's difficult to do things without destroying the generators, right? Something like that. Just bear with me for a second here. Again, I'm not a game designer, so do not criticize this. It's not supposed to be good. Suppose that in the forest, there are generators that generate monsters within a particular range. So imagine there's a thing that's got a radius, and the radius, inside the radius, it generates monsters. And if you kill some monsters without killing the generator, it just generates new monsters, right? But not like Gauntlet, where the monster comes out of the thing, more like a necromancer or something, where it's there's just a dude or a tower, and the tower just anywhere inside its radius can raise a creep right there, right? Does this make sense? So suppose we have something roughly that, and we put the generators down to generate monsters so that those regions, those sort of circles, are overlapping like a Venn diagram. And in the areas where they overlap, you get both kinds of monsters. Does everyone kind of understand what I'm talking about? So you will, in general, have to think about whether you want to take out one of these generators, because if you don't take it out, it might be very hard to make progress through a section where there's multiple overlapping generators. There might be way too many monsters, and it'd be really hard to win or something, right? Something like this. Or, in addition to the monsters, the generators also have barriers or something in it. Some reason why you have to take out a generator. Well, that seems less good. Anyway. And then the other thing I was thinking is, what if when you take out a generator, it itself will come back? So taking out a generator only takes it down for a certain amount of time, right? But after it comes back, it is worse. So it generates harder monsters. Does this make sense? So you have to be like judicious and decide when you're going to take out a particular generator, because if you just take out all the generators all the time, they'll eventually get like way too hard. So you have to kind of like pick and choose, like when are you going to take out a generator, and when you do it, you then have to make sure you do the thing that you wanted to do while that generator was down, because otherwise it's just going to get very bad afterward, right? And so like there's kind of like a natural, like the outer world gets harder because you've taken out the generators multiple times and they're leveling up for you to get to dungeons where you get like the items and stuff that you need to get better, right? Correct. Like the idea is that you need to be able to make decisions like, okay, I'm going to take out this generator and go in here to this dungeon to get some loot, which I'll use to like power myself up. And then maybe I now have a natural reason to explore a different dungeon or a different area because the other generators are still like kind of easier now than that original one was, because that original one will now power up a bit, right? So it sort of like makes the area I guess one thing I'm wondering now is, should the generators and the dungeons be sort of the same thing? Like, should they be in the same place or should they be in different places? I'm thinking different places, but I don't really know. But is there a way to tie the overall difficulty to the dungeon difficulty, or is it better to keep them separate? I was thinking separate, was my guess. Again, not really strongly sure why, but anyway. And so then the idea is that the paths by which these are connected, so the various ways that you could get, to the different dungeons, you probably want them to be interconnected a couple times so that there's different routes to go. And then the idea should be different routes should overlap different generators, right? So that there's reasons why you might go a certain route or look for new routes to get somewhere, because maybe a particular generator got taken out too many times and is now too difficult or something, and you need an alternate route so that you can't, so that you will then maybe go do a level that's easier to get some loot so that you can be better and attack that generator again, because you probably couldn't do it now. Right? That's sort of, I guess, what I think we would want. I think that's basically what I want to try first. I think that's what we're going to go with. Yeah. Okay, so basically I think what I want, that answers my first question, which is these things have to be kind of connected in semi-meandering but multiply connected routes. We don't really want there to just be one way to go. Maybe once in a while, like maybe like the random generator can sort of like occasionally decide that there's only one route to go to a particular dungeon. Like maybe that happens, but we would like that to be rare. So that is a unusual connection for a dungeon. Whereas the common connection for a dungeon is that there's more than one way in, more than one way out, right? Now, we also want generators, so we want to place the generators as a secondary pass. I guess I don't really know what we want the algorithm to be for that, but presumably it's sort of similar, meaning the same exact thing that we did in the world generator for the dungeons is probably also what we would want for everything else, right? Not everything else, but the all of the generators, right? And one of the things I'm going to give myself a little benefit here. In the world room labeling system, I'm going to go ahead and put like a debug color in here, and maybe that becomes a real color at some point in the future when we are actually, if we draw a map, like at some point we might add the ability for you to look at a map, for example. And so if there's the ability to look at a map, then we might have this be the actual like color, like that square shows up on the map or something, right? So it may not actually stay a debug color forever. But for the moment, it will. And what I'm going to do here is make it so that when we add a world room, we push a debug color on there, just so now this is for my own convenience for building the generator. And, when we put these down, I'm just going to have a way of marking them with different colors. So when we create a dungeon, I have to pick a color for that. We're going to pick, I guess, the traditional yellow for that. When we pick the orphanage, let's do green for that because it's like the starting area. When we pick a regular room, which is, at the moment, we probably don't really even want a world marker for this, but we'll do it anyway. We'll make that just be blue. And then when we draw these, so in the world mode, when you're in the world mode and you do that debug thing, and we draw these rooms, you can see that in here. Instead of passing an arbitrary color, what we'll do is we'll use the room color that we just set up. And again, there's no point to this other than just making it easier for me to debug so I can tell what the heck our random generator is placing down so that we can work on the random generator further than we would be able to until we actually had like geometry for these rooms, right? Now, why that's red, I don't know. Why is that red? Did I say green and then did red? I did. Wow. Good work. So I said we would make a thing that was green, and then I made it red and confused my own self. Okay, so green for the starting area. You can see it there. Blue is for anywhere that actually generated a room, and we don't really care about that right now. And then yellow is for the dungeon areas. So now let's place down red generators, and then let's figure out how we're going to connect these things up. And that's just going to be kind of us making something ad hoc that we feel like gives us a route that, like, routes that we think make sense gameplay wise, which is kind of tricky. One of the things that you can't really that it's hard to really know is what generates good gameplay connectivity, right? Like, that's kind of different than just how do you connect things that maybe like look like human structures or whatever, which are easier to analyze problems. Is Handmade here getting multiplayer? Well, it already is multiplayer, right? I mean, if I pick up a controller here, I mean, right? Two different dudes. You can play it with two people if you want. I don't know that we'll ever make the game really be multiplayer. Like, you'd have to actually design the game to be multiplayer, which we probably won't ever do. But it supports that concept, right? It's just, I don't think we'll ever really do that because it's, I don't know, I don't really want to have to design that. Like, that's a game. It's like a whole other game design thing you have to do is then go like, okay, we balance this game for single player, and now we've got to balance it again for multiplayer. But if someone else goes and does it, I mean, you'll have the source code. So anyway, what we want to do now is just say, okay, let's place some of these other elements. So in addition to placing dungeons down, which is kind of where we thought they would be, we would then place generators down. And again, don't really know exactly how we want this to work per se, but let's say that this is the placed. Actually, I suppose this is going to be a different routine, right? Because these are dungeons. So this is like create dungeons. Create forest is presumably what would have this in it. And the forest would be after the fact, right? So in here, we would do something where we would say, okay, there's going to be a placed generator count, something like this. And I guess one problem here is I don't know that this wants to be a random roll. So I don't really know about this one. Like, I don't know what we want to do for whether this is a random roll or whether we would just keep placing them until we didn't find anywhere else that makes sense to place them, right? So that part is more confusing. So I still want a thing in here where when we are tracking things in the generator, I need there to be a way to remember these things, right? So we're going to have like a generator count and generator locations, but like it's going to probably be like somewhat dynamic. So we would just like push an array on here that's like however big we think it needs to be. And then we're going to generate some probably till we just don't find any places after a few iterations or something like that. Because, gosh, I just don't know. Like, one way to think of it would be like do it until every dungeon is covered by at least 2 generators, or you pick a number. This is like, again, this is game design stuff and I don't like it. So you would probably do something like pick a number for every dungeon. And that's how many generators should overlap with that dungeon. Maybe. All right. Okay. All right, so let's say it's something like this, because I could at least make a vague argument that there is a game design here. Your game design woes are the essence of my existence as a programmer. I feel your pain in my soul. Yeah, I mean, it's just a lack of experience, right? Like, probably I should have like designed like 100 games really quickly or something at some point in my career, like one every couple of days, and then I could say I was comfortable with game design. As it is, I just try not to do it very often, right? Let it be someone else's job to design a game. All right, so let me make this argument. So let's suppose at least that a good game design control to have in our bag of tricks. Because basically what's going to happen, right, is we're going to generate a world, we're going to start playing it, and we're going to be like, this thing sucks or something, and we need to fix it, right? We're going to be playing, and we're going to like experience something and say we got to make this better, right? This part sucks or whatever. So what I'm thinking is we need basically to think, if I think about what are the tools I'm going to need for this, what we probably want to be able to do is pick points in the world that are important, like dungeons or points on paths along dungeons, or secret areas where there's like an item, or like the fairy fountain, right? Like we don't really have that equivalent in this game yet, but you know, something like that. That's a thing you find that's like beneficial to you. And like we want to pick points and say these points in the world should have this many overlapping generators, right? Let's say. That to me sounds sensible. That to me sounds sensible. So I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to do two things. I'm delete this piece of code because actually I don't think I need it. And what I'm going to do is say, okay, instead of doing it this way where I've got dungeon count and dungeon locations, I think we can pretty much just do this with one piece of code and say there is something like a world like map location or world gen location or something. I don't know. I assume I don't already have that as a thing. Yeah. These are going to be like locations that are important for some reason. And I'm just going to say like what the type is in like a flag, right? So we're going to have like a flag 32 kind of a thing here that's like built up out of world gen location types that are going to tell us like what this thing actually was. And it could be multiple things, right? And then when we do like location generation, we can basically just have generic location generators that we call. So I don't have to write it every time. I can just like call a thing that's like, pick me some locations that don't conflict with X. And it will come back with like, here is your answer, right? So then I can do like something where we just like, okay, there's a dungeon, you know, there's an orphanage, something like this. You know what I'm saying to you? Where we just do like orphanage, dungeon, generator, and I don't know. There's probably like a, you know, another thing which is like a bonus room or like an item room or something. You know, or shop, you know, these sorts of things. Shouldn't get ahead of myself here, but you know what I'm saying. We'll use item room as our stand-in for now. So we'll call this monster generator because maybe there's other kinds of generators, right? So something like that. And then we can have like a world gen location that says like what type of location it is, and you can have multiple of these, right? So maybe it's like types. Because it doesn't have to be just one. You could choose to put an item room and a monster generator in the same place, maybe. I mean, probably not. But you could choose to do an item room and a dungeon in the same place, maybe. Again, probably not. Maybe these don't really need to overlap. But I'm just thinking maybe you want that. I don't know. Well, another one would be like... you could mark something as wanting to have... like overlapping generators as well. Although I guess we could just use that as a thing. Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, we would have something like this, and that way, instead of having to have like dungeon count dungeon locations, we could just do a thing that's like location count and like locations, like so, and then you would just be able to build on this and be able to call the same functions on it. That's all I'm thinking. I just think that would be better, right? I feel like that would be better. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to do that. In here you can see when we do the create the dungeon and we pass a dungeon index. Here what we're really going to do is look at the world gen location. So we would basically say like, okay, let's pull out this thing. Whichever one. And, you know, maybe we even do like get location because we want to double check that we're not passing in garbage here just to give ourselves a little bit of a break. So in here we say like, okay, there's a thing that's like get location and it looks up these locations for us. We pass it the world generator and an index, and that's just the way that we access these things so that we know that no one goes rogue. These are all generic. Here, have a location back. And we can assert that we didn't like overflow the location count at that point. We could also here have like a max location count if this is going to be a thing that we just kind of push on. We just, because this is in the generator, we don't care. Just generate a large one, fill it up, and then flush it. So we can do an assert here that's like location count index is less than location count, and off we go. Now when we do create dungeon, we would get the location back, and the dungeon P is just going to be the lock P. And I don't even need to do dungeon P here. I can deal with that later. But for now, it's just going to place that marker in the world, so, you know, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Don't know why I put a colon there. Typo. So then when we do create dungeons, we're basically able to do sort of a generic function now that would allow us to test. So in here, we could say like, hey, test to see what the distance is. This whole thing, right? We can do a thing where we say, instead of having to do these loops where we do not too close to the dungeon, now we can turn that into just a simple call that we make. We can just like, you know, Punk is, it is not a KCON thing. It was a long time ago, but this is now in Ryan Fleury's forecoder layer. So you can get it. You can get it if you use forecoder Fleury. If you happen to be doing that. So anyway. So we would do a thing where we say, you know, min distance 2 or something like get closest. In fact, what we could do is 2 of these. We could do one that's like get closest location 2, and you would pass like a v2 where it's like a point, and it would find it. And the other one we would do is get closest distance to, and that would just be calling this and returning the distance, right? Now we want a mask here, so this is basically going to be like one of these. Where I assume we would do like include. I don't know whether the mask would be include or exclude. Exclude is nice because then it's just if you don't pass anything, it checks against everything. But I feel like include is probably better in this particular case. Like include types, you know? And so maybe I don't know, man. I'm gonna switch it back to exclude types. So basically, it defaults to 0, which means anything. But if you want to, you can say like, don't consider some of these things. Someone can just make it and hit tilde if they want to do include. So that seems fine. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. I don't need to justify myself to you, man. I don't need to justify myself. Okay. Anyway, I'm gonna go with that. So we're gonna do it so that not too close to other dungeon here. I'm gonna change to not too close to other like location, because we're not really doing that anymore. We're gonna be we don't want these things to be close to anything really. So not too close to any other location is just going to say, okay, get the closest distance to this thing. And then, which is what, dungeon P? Yeah, dungeon P. So get the closest distance to this thing, and then we want that to be the min dungeon separation distance, right? So if not, it's not close to any other dungeon if the minimum dungeon separation distance is exceeded by the closest distance to something, right? So the closest distance to just has to be greater than the minimum dungeon separation distance, and then we're not too close to another location. I think that's about right. Seems like it to me anyway. And off we go. Now, we do want maybe to remember the dungeon count. So I do want to put a dungeon count in here, probably, although maybe I don't. I don't really know. I don't know if we need to say how many dungeons there are now. Maybe we do. I guess we'll wait till we actually use that to put that in there, I guess. I can't really think of a very important reason, so I just don't know. So we're just going to generate it here instead. And that's just, for now, we'll leave it there. And we'll export it to the rest of the code later if we actually find that we do want it to be a thing. Okay, so if we want to create another location here, we're going to say here's the placed location. We're going to do like a push location on gen, and then we will set its placed locations P to the dungeon P, and the placed location types will be dungeon, right? Now, we could snuggle those into the push location call, and maybe we want to do that. I'm guessing that's going to be a useful utility, so maybe it just looks like this a lot of the time. Now, maybe we don't actually want that all the time, but we can deal with that later. So, at this point, it just looks pretty much done. So I think that's fine. And then at the end, now that we have sort of where those things are, we would just go through here. We'd go through all of these. We don't have an all indexes, do we now? We would go through here and say, okay, the dungeon is really a location index. And the location index is going to go through like the total location count. And each one of those will now get sort of generated based on which one it is. And at the moment, like I said, these guys can't really overlap. These are main things, and we're not really allowing multiples. So it may be that it really should have just been a straightforward type, but I'm not going to do that quite yet just because I don't really know that that's going to be the case forever. So I'm just kind of like hedging my bets here slightly. And maybe this is a waste of time, but I'm just guessing that I want to put flags in there. You know, I think I think? I think this is dumb. What we really should do is this. We just have the enums, and then if we want flags, things that go together with that, we just add a flags field in here that's like other stuff, right? Because each room is going to have its main idea of what it is, right? And we kind of need that as like a base thing to say, okay, go make a room of this type. And then if there's mix-ins, like, oh, this can be an orphanage room, but it also has blah, then we just do that as an additional step. Pretty simple. So I think I'm doing that for now. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any code for generating these sorts of things, but that's okay, because we're just trying to create a skeletal world right now that we could plausibly fill in later. And so, if we get a dungeon, this is all got to be up here, actually, right? If we get a dungeon, we call create dungeon. If we get an orphanage, we call create orphanage, right? And off these things would go. Now, in our case, create orphanage. We kind of have a little bit of a identity crisis here, because we're kind of doing this immediately on that path, but we don't actually want to do that really. Like the orphanage, presumably doesn't even really need a create orphanage call per se. I mean, maybe it does, but it's kind of got two, like we've got like two layers of things. This is not really create dungeons. It's like layout dungeons, layout forest, layout orphanage, right? And then after that, we do the create version of each of these. And we could pass the lock directly here, which maybe we just can, because there's no particular reason not to do it. And you can see here that really what we're doing at this point is just unscrewing up what we did before, where before we had all these like weird function callbacks and delayed things for no reason. And here we're just making it procedural, like immediate mode, basically, where we just do the steps we want, and then each call is actually done manually so that we can intercede anywhere we want to, and have, arbitrary weird code that we just make up for gameplay reasons, right? Happening anywhere, which is really what the goal of this sort of reorg is, because we don't want to handcuff ourselves. Like, we want to have the maximum possible flexibility as we go. There's not going to be 1024 locations. I don't know why I put that in there, but let's suppose that they did. We're just going to pick a stupid random number at this point, because it doesn't matter. Okay, so we've got layout forest. We've got layout orphanage. I'm not convinced these actually should even be separate functions. It's probably just layout overworld. They should probably all just be in one, because as we add utility functions, it will become much simpler for that to happen. And so probably that's more what we would want. In fact, as I'm looking at it, I think that's probably what we would do. So in here, we'd probably just get rid of this and say like layout overworld. Right? And then layout overworld just does all the things we need it to actually do. Well, I guess maybe we'll leave the orphanage one here for a second, because that does the room generator, and we'll just say like, hey, this is like layout overworld, and in it there's this as well, which is the orphanage, right? And that way, it's sort of clear like what we're doing and when. I think that all makes reasonable sense. We're gonna find out, I guess. But I think it's fine. Okay. So now we just need these actual functions to not be illusory. So let's go ahead and actually put them to make them actually sort of work. Okay, so this is world gen location, and I guess this is, I don't know what we want to call this. I'm just going to call it lock for now still, but I think it maybe should have a better name than that. So there's going to be create dungeon. There's going to be create monster generator. And the monster generators are going to be, I almost did it again. That's green. Red. There's going to be the orphanage we have down below. The other thing we had is item room. Item room will be, I guess, cyan. We haven't placed any item rooms, so there won't be any at the moment, but we want there to be some of those eventually. And these are all going to move down below here, and this is going to be create orphanage, which actually does create the little stand-in room right now, but which will expand back to the original orphanage that we had before at some point, right? Okay. Now, what we would like to do is implement this push location call, which is basically the same as the get location call, except it's going to increment the total number. Otherwise, it's the same. And it's going to have our flags. So it's going to have a world gen location type. Sorry, not flags, type. And a P. Just because those are usually, that's just convenience. Those are usually the things you initialize. So we're putting them in there, but we don't really need that to be the case. Anyway, so we're going to assert that the location count is less than the max location count so that we didn't overflow. And then we're going to grab a location count and ask for get location. Now, I probably have to do it more like this. So here's the lock index. And then we just say get location on that lock index. And now we've got a new location. That location is going to have some stuff initialized. I'm going to clear it just because I don't know if these will get reused. They probably won't, but we might as well. And off we go. So now, I think we have everything that we need. What is the complaint here? Location count is not... Did I spell it wrong? Location count is not a member of world gen location. Hey, you're right. That's supposed to be word generator. Bad autocomplete. All right. I think that's basically it now. Let's go clean up the utility code. This orphanage generator needs to take one of these, which it won't use right now. But we can have... well, you know what? It can. It would do it like this. And this is not probably how we want to do this at the end of the day, but it's good enough for now. Okay. I guess these are not casted. So whatever. Fine. No one cares. Now, if we take a look in here. So we have get closest location to. This is going to loop over all of the things. This is going to be like nasty and n squared. We probably will never care. But if we do, then we would add a little spatial partition here to test these more quickly. But it's unlikely that we will ever care. But we might. You never know. If the worlds get too complicated, if the numbers get above like 100, then you might. But it's, they probably won't. That would just take way too long to play the actual game at that point. So, probably not super likely. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get one of the locations that we're testing against. We're going to look at the test location's actual position and check it against. We're just going to basically take the minimum, so like best or sort of like min distance, I guess. And we're going to, or I guess best distance. That's min distance. And we're just going to look for whichever one is lowest. So whichever one is lowest, the separation. We need some way of returning. If you've never added anything before, we need kind of like the null room. But I think that can just be the orphanage, right? So what we can do is like at the very outset, push that on so that we know we always have one thing on there, so we don't have to worry about it from then on out. So we can always do this. So we just push a location, it's the orphanage, off we go, it's at 0, 0, and everyone's fine with that. All right, so what we would then do is anytime we see the min distance, actually I guess it's the min distance squared. Anytime the min distance squared is greater than the square, or greater than the distance squared of this thing, right? We start at the highest distance. Anytime our min distance is greater than the distance we have here, we just pick this one instead. So we keep the new best distance, just like we've done a billion other times before. Very, very simple, right? So really not much going on there. For get closest distance to, all we would do is say, okay, we want the world gen location of whatever comes back. And one of the things though is that we would really like both of these to come back. So we'd really like it to be more like, index, loc index, and distance. Something like that, or dist squared, right? And we'd like that to just be returned. Because that way you don't have to care about which one you wanted. You can have both. Now, you should probably be able to pass through an exclusion here, which will just get carried. And the result here is just whatever the distance is. Okay. What else we got? All right, so I think that's all good, but we would need to square this guy. Other than that, I think we're fine. Okay, let's debug that. Because we're gonna be in, issues if we don't. It looks like that's returning false all the time or something like that, right? So anyway, we're gonna do place dungeon count. We have to do it not too close to a location. We get the closest distance squared of the dungeon P that we randomly pick, and we check it against the square of the min dungeon separation distance, which is this thing over here. We then go through and do get closest location to. That's going to run through all the things that we currently have pushed on the location stack. We look at the distance squared. So I guess we don't care if it's too close to the orphanage, though. So maybe that has to be discounted because they might all be within that distance of the orphanage, or many may be. So that might be less good. I have to think about that. But anyway, let's make sure the rest of this. So we go through the locations. We grab each location out. We look at the squared distance between the point that was passed in and wherever this thing is. We then check to see if the distance we have is greater than the distance we found. And if it is, we take the new distance and keep that one instead. Yeah. And that's basically it. Which seems correct. So I do wonder if maybe like this won't work. These parameters just don't work with the orphanage not excluded, which I'm not sure. Because technically the thing before would have had not world lock orphanage in there. But yeah. So, all right. In order to do exclusions of types of rooms now, we have to have a way of building these flags, and it's not really a problem because they're lined up, in order. So what we would need to do here is when we do this, we would have to then check the exclusion types. This is kind of annoying. This is why I had these as actual flags before, which is, again, we talked about things that C++ could have done better. This is one of them. So when we get one of these locations, we have to check to make sure that it passes. So we would say if matches, and this might become more fancy eventually. Like maybe there's a better, more fancy query. But we've got in here just a way. Oh, the heck happened there? I do not know what just happened. Okay. Some kind of typo. Anyway, internal B32 matches. We would have a world gen location and this. And then what we would do is say we want to exclude these. So we look and we say the result is if the location type, turned into a flag. And we can do like flag of, right? Where we pass one of these world gen location types. And it's just going to return that type. So I assume I can force this to be an unsigned in here. Anyway, so the world gen location type. Yeah, I probably don't need to do that. We can just do that. The world gen location type, as it comes back, it's going to shift up the one and give us a particular mask out of that thing. We're going to check to see if a flag of the location type that we are asked to filter is matched against the exclude types, right? And more specifically, we want to and it, like we want to see whether this flag is in the exclude types or not. If it is in the exclude types, we don't use it because it's exclude. So it's knotted, right? And off we go. I guess? Meh. So anyway, that's basically it. If we then want to use one of these exclusion types, we have to do flag of, and that's the nastier thing. Like, this is one of the things that C++ could have done nicely for you for a long time and just never really did. So remember when I was saying, like, maybe one of these other languages doesn't screw that up as bad? You know? There's the thing. Maybe someday if we switch to some other language, they didn't screw that part up. They probably did, but, you know, one of them maybe didn't. Hard to say. Presumably, if you go look, one of those other languages didn't screw that up. It's a kind of obvious thing that anyone would kind of just know if they program much. So I'm guessing somebody didn't screw it up, but who knows? All right. So, what is the complaint here? What happened to that? Did I call that on something I should not have called that on? One thing I can do here is to make this a little easier for us to debug, is to just put this in debug mode while we're doing generation, so we can actually see where it actually complained. Okay, so I guess it worked that time, but I forgot to increment the place dungeon count. So that'll do it. That's probably what the problem was. So it was just we forgot. We were just kind of going. So probably actually we don't need to exclude this. That was probably my bad. I forgot we were incrementing how many we placed, so we just placed an infinite number. But maybe we'll see. We'll see. But it terminated without that in there, so it looks like it's fine, right? All right. So let's switch back to release mode, since our lighting doesn't really run fast enough in debug mode to really play with. Should probably have a thing that just turns that off in debug mode, like it just turns off lighting in debug mode, because then it would just run fine. But yeah. So anyway, there's some rooms, and that's all fine. So then we want to place some generators, and so, you know, maybe we want a different kind of selection process. This one is one. So the way this worked is this was a half analyst generator, right? Like it generated like a half ring that was placing stuff in. And I guess I don't really know that we want to generalize that in any particular way, because I don't think we're going to use it. Most other things are probably not in the half analyst. Although, he says, I do think we could make this more of a thing that generates stuff in an analyst in general, right? We could do one that's like, it does an analyst in general, but the analyst is then like clipped to a rectangle. Right? Because you could think of this instead of as a half analyst, you could think of it as an analyst clipped to a rectangle that only extends forward from the orphanage. So maybe what we want is a thing where you can basically say, like, I want to generate this thing in an analyst, but there's basically like a clipping area that's like, you can't go behind this because we're saying the forest isn't allowed to like curve past where the orphanage is. So why are there so many dropped frames right now? There were just like a ton of dropped frames, by the way. Did the stream kind of stutter? Did we lose internet here? Can anyone still hear me? Am I just talking to nobody? No, it looks like normally I don't ever see this thing dropping frames. It's dropping frames like crazy right now. Did Twitch go down or anything? Yeah, it keeps happening. It's like periodically it's doing that. All right. Well, should we take a quick break or something? I'm not sure what to do because it seems like it's intermittent, which means it might resolve itself in a second. But it was definitely dropping frames. According to OBS, it was not able to actually send them to Twitch. Let's take a really quick break, and hopefully this will just go away, and I'll be right back. All right, we're going to do a quick check here just to make sure that it doesn't go off green again, but we're hoping that basically like everyone took a quick break, the Twitch servers like shook themselves out, and like it's not going to crap out again. So it's not complaining about drop frames anymore. So I'm just going to hope that that was like, oh my God, the data center's on fire. But they got the little fire extinguisher out, and they put the fire out, and now we'll be able to stream. We're almost done with what we were doing, and we'll just hope it will be able to stay up long enough to just finish dropping these rooms down, and then we can call it a day. Right. Okay. So what I was sort of proposing is if this thing was literally just like there's a function we can call called like do the thing with stuff. And what it will do is it will basically produce for you the version of this analyst thing that, you know, that is parameterized on the region in which you would like to pick it, which for now will just always be this region, I guess. And then it will have a like a check here for where you tell it you want to be centered around and how far you want the analyst to go. So like this crap here is like what you would do. And so if we want to do that, yeah, we would just do like some kind of nonsense like this, like find or like pick random location, and we would pass the generator in, and then we would pass like some spec here, and this thing, maybe we'll call it Overworld location, because we may not, well, you know, maybe I'll be even more specific and call it like you know, pick point in analysts or something. And then this will take the world generator and an analyst spec, I guess. Something like that. Or maybe world gen analysts. And then we would just say that there's like a center point for the analysts, I guess. So there's the center P. And then there is the like a center point for the analysts, the min distance and max distance. So it's like the radius, right? That this is going to be, I don't think it's center P, just P, right? And the two distances. And then maybe you can also say like what you want the, like, what you want the min distance to be from like the separation distance from other crap in the world. Right. And it's not maybe the best thing in the world, because maybe you want to be able to specify like a couple different ones of these, and maybe we make this an array later on or something. But for now, it would be like, you know, exclude types and min dist from types, right? From locations. Min distance from existing lock, something like that. So my thinking is you fill out one of these, you say like, here's the analysts. We set a bunch of garbage on the analysts so that you just get like, okay, the point in this particular case is the orphanage P, which we didn't really generate here. So when we do layout overworld and we do this orphanage P thing, we don't actually, I think, want that. We really want it to just be here where we set it to whatever it is. So we just say, oh, it's at 0, 0, like happy birthday. And that's, we place the debug marker, at orphanage P. And then I thought, wasn't there a thing that creates the orphanage? I guess, yeah, it pushes the location here. So what I'd rather do there, like I think I said before, is I'd rather have that be part of the layout overworld thing, I guess. So in here where we do the layout overworlds, it does a thing where it you know, does max locations, push location. For the orphanage here, we don't need to place a debug marker because that can just happen in create orphanage, can it? So that's like whatevs. Right, so we don't really care about that. We can save that value later if we actually want, but for now I don't really want to do that. So here we would say, okay, the orphanage location is what we want to base this around. The distances are the ones that we specified before. So we've got this 80 and this 160. And then in exclude types, we have nothing because everything is kind of counted here. So really the only other thing is this minimum distance from the existing stuff, We then, now that we have this analyst set up, we can just generate things inside the analysts all day long. And that will give us the dungeon placement that we actually need. So pick point in analysts. Now just needs to do a loop until it finds, whatever it's going to find. And maybe we make a limit on this so that it will not hang if somehow we got in a bad case or something like that. So it's going to return some location. And that location will just be a bad location that doesn't really work if somehow we can't find one, right? And maybe we assert in that case. So like we assert here that iteration, is not equal to, 999 or whatever, because that would be bad. But other than that, we're fine. So we would still do basically what we're doing here with World Gen Analysts. And then in here, we would, this maybe is something we'll parameterize later. At the moment, we really wouldn't parameterize it, but we are going to parameterize things like the center of the analysts, and then the dungeon distance here. This is the result piece. So this is the result that we're picking. The distance between the results and the center point is one of the distances we check whether it's in the band, like so. So dist squared has to be within the band. All right. And again, not the best because we're just picking a lot of points here that are wasteful. Like we probably want to pick something in the band more directly. But at the moment, we're too lazy to do that. So we probably want something a little bit better there eventually. At the moment, we don't really care. And so then the other thing we want to be able to do is search to see whether this particular result that we're picking is not too bad with respect to other things that already kind of exist, right? If we're in the distance band and we're not too close to other locations, we will do a break. And now we have our result, which in theory should just produce the exact same thing we already had, which it does. But now we can also pick in our layout overworld. You can see us doing our place dungeon count thing here. Now we can do another one of these very trivially, which places like item rooms or something, right? So in much the same way that we generated like dungeon count, we can have an item room count. You can see why I generalize those things, right? Because I want this to be easy, so I can just kind of throw crap in here, and I don't have to write it every time. So then we could just go over the placed item room count. In fact, this code doesn't really have to look like this anymore because now it's saner. Because we've pulled that out, because we pulled out the thing that does the actual generation, it means that every time through here we succeed. We're not using the same loop for two things. Just makes it easier to write it in this way instead, right? So instead of having that, where we have to write it in sort of a while loop form, we can do like placed item room count, placed item room count, and then item room count here. And this will just do exactly the same thing. So maybe this is like, I don't know. I don't have a lot to say about this, but Maybe placed P. I mean, why not? Okay. Wow. All right. Oh, this is the wrong analyst. That's why. So when we're placing the item rooms, these are probably going to be more varied. So this probably wants to be, different. So in here, this is probably going to be like much more sparse. And, I mean, maybe not even quite that, but, and then also allow it to be closer, right? To existing things. I don't know if that'll quite work, but we'll see. All right. So here is like our kind of spread where we've now got some item rooms that are sort of strewn throughout here. And we've got we've got our dungeons. It looks like it has trouble placing these, which means that, again, I'm not sure how, I'm not sure how much that has to do with it. It might just be because this analyst placement routine is so crappy. Because if you actually want to place something in the analyst, we may just want to do that by picking like a random angle and then a random distance so that it's at least like coherent, and not picking mostly out of left field, right? So that said, it may just be that the tolerances are set too low. So I don't know. But it's worth just thinking about for a second. The other thing is, these in particular, I don't know how much we care about the analyst part in this particular case. But let me just try and see what happens if I do that, because I'm not sure how bad this might be. It might be pretty bad. So let's look at doing this instead with like ARM2. So with ARM2, what we would do is say, okay, we're going to pick an angle. And normally we would say pick the whole 360. But what we're going to do here is actually just clip to the orphanage line. So basically, like, there's going to be a thing that says, like, anything below this we can't use. So we will have a problem of the generator, when we generate points, it will pick points that are outside of the area where we're allowed to be. And those will get thrown away, but everything else will at least be in the band. So here we would say, okay, the result point is going to be a random between the two inputs you gave us. So this no longer has to be here. This is just gonna work always, because we're only gonna pick points that are in the analysts to begin with, right? So that goes away. And so then we're literally just testing this one. So if the closest distance squared is greater than the square of the distance check, then we're good. This doesn't need to be here. This does. So this is basically the analyst center plus a random between 0 and tau 32, right? Any angle. So it's the center plus a random distance. I can maybe make this a dist from center. Dist from center times a random vector arm that is in any that radiates in any direction. Right? Oops, forgot to pass the entropy. There we go. This goes away. And what is the problem? It can't tell which one I'm talking about. Which one do you think I'm talking about, dude? All right. So that will always generate things in the analysts. If I ran it now, though, we will have the problem of they'll be behind the orphanage, right? So we then just need our accept reject for whether or not it goes behind the orphanage. And otherwise, I think that's probably just a saner way to generate things in the analysts region. Okay. So let's add that in there, and then we'll see whether or not it's just the tolerances, because it might just be the tolerances. This will be a higher density pick, because only 50% of the points will get thrown away, whereas I don't know how many points of the other one will get thrown away. A lot. Potentially most. But that doesn't mean the tolerances aren't too high. So in here, we would just say, all right, if, let's say, is in forest or something like that. So we're going to call this is in forest. It will return true or false if a point is in the forest. And all that has to do is just say that if the y value for the point is greater than or equal to, or let's say greater than, the orphanage y line. Let's just call it that. And this is just going to be where you are required to place things. And we can set this orphanage y line to whatever we want, right? It can be, it's just whatever we think it should be. For whatever. Doesn't matter. So when we do our layout overworld and we pick the orphanage P, we're going to say that the orphanage y line is going to be the orphanage P.y for now, and maybe we want that to even be a little bit up. Like we maybe want it to be like slightly forward of the y, like maybe this should actually be like +5. So it's all a little bit up from the orphanage. It can't, so there's a little bit of a clearance there. I don't know. So it looks like the tolerances are just too much, right? At that point. So that means we're trying to pack too many things in a space where they wouldn't necessarily fit, if that makes sense. So drop this down. Is one way to fix that, and that just allows item rooms to be closer to other things. And maybe we need to give ourselves more room. I don't know. But, you know, it depends. If the tolerances are too close and there's no way to, like, get a packing that actually works, then, you know, there isn't, and you have to do something else, right? So, I think that's fine. And the only thing that I would say is probably this exposes a little bit of, like, why I was nervous about having to do this. Because we really want a little bit more logic in here, probably. We probably want a min distance from anything and then a min distance from specific, right? So we probably want to do, like, you know, this sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and say world gen filter is a thing, and it's got this in it. Exclude types and mindist or something. That. And then here it's like filters, and you can have some. You know what I mean? Something like that. And then when you do the world gen analysts thing, you can just kind of like loop through. You can loop through those. So in here where we do the get closest distance squared for a result thing, that's now going to be like a pass-fail thing that you check multiple of, right? So past filters equals true for, and I guess you just check all the filters. Maybe you set a filter count. Do you set a filter count? I don't know. So we in here would say, look, for every filter that's in this thing, if the for the filter, if the min distance is greater than 0, because if the min distance is greater than 0, we don't need to check, right? So that's kind of how you tell me that you didn't actually care. Then we do this guy. So we do if it passed the filters and it's in the forest. We could save a little time by just doing this, saying if it's in the forest, we do it, right? So we say, all right, if this thing's in the forest, then we're going to check all the filters. We loop through each of the filters. We check the min distance of this particular filter. We say filter min dist has to be greater than 0. And then we do get closest distance squared, and we pass the filter to that. Right? Yeah. So we pass the exclude, and we check the filter min dist. Something like that, right? Okay, so what we want to do is we'll say if the filter min dist is greater than 0, and we fail, I guess, then we set it to false. So if the closest distance is less than the minimum, then we set pass filters to false, and you can break out of the loop, because if any fail, then they all fail, right? So we'll see. All right, so filter 0, min dist is blah. Filter 0 min dist is blah. And then in this case, I guess what I'm saying is I want to put an exclude here, which excludes everything but item rooms. Right? And for item rooms specifically, I want them to be somewhat far apart. So I don't want like 2 item rooms near each other. Maybe. Warning treated as error. What is the warning? Conversions from int to U32. I have a hard time describing just how little I give a crap about that. We want this to be flag of, though, right? So maybe that will help us, because flag of will cast it for us, right? Hopefully. Yes. So that's good. Hey, that's actually useful error then, because we've basically, by using flag of, that sort of catches whether, it helps us catch whether we turned it into a flag accidentally. That's not what the compiler was actually warning us about. But because that happens to work, it's kind of a nice check. So we're kind of using something the wrong way, but hey, I'll take it. Okay, so now we should see something where we don't have any two item rooms close to each other, which does look about right, but you can't have an item room close to something else, right? Or closer, anyway. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but I was just kind of throwing it out there as something we might want to do, right? So we should always see item rooms a little closer to other things than we see, like, you know, and we could change it again as well in the future if we want to. I don't know. We'll see what we end up doing. All right. So now let's add the generators, and this is going to be a little bit. This is going to be a little bit weird. So the way I envision this working is that we're basically going to put down generators, and the generators are going to be like, whether or not they are considered good is like whether or not they overlap things we need them to overlap, right? Roughly. So I'm not really sure exactly how we want to do that, but by the way, this actually can now be like exact, so we can just do this. And now we know that it's always the right size. Okay. Also, this doesn't really need to be called this. This could just be called placed count, just to make the loop read a little bit better, like so. And then the monster generator count, these are going to be these are probably going to be like based off of existing dungeon locations or something. So it's probably going to be something like, all right, we're going to place these, and we need them to be based on locations where other things were. So we would probably go through each one of the existing dungeons. Not really sure how we want to do this. Like, I assume we want to just pick a dungeon or an item room and say we're going to place it off of this thing. I don't know. Maybe we don't really want to do that. So I have no idea this could just be completely stupid, but for each world gen location, I'm imagining there's something like generators, overlapping generator count or something, right? And so for each world gen location, we would add like one of these things. And then we would go over all of the existing world locations that exist. And we would say if this overlapped, if for however big this generator is, and I don't know if like generators are going to have different sizes, but probably we would just say if you're within that distance, you get an overlapping generator like mark. So it'd be like lock index over all the locations that currently exist. And we would say for each one of these, if you are overlapping, so if the overlap is less than the square of the generator radius, like if the squared length is less than the squared length of the generator radius, then this test lock gets marked as having an overlapping generator that's like on it, right? Now I don't know what that value should be. I have like no idea. But maybe what we do is we run through things and we take like a weighted average of things that have overlaps, and we try to avoid putting too many generators overlapping the same thing. Like maybe. I'm really kind of hazy on this, but you know what I'm saying. Like maybe you do something like this, where you say, okay, we're going to go through all these things, and if the test location that we're looking at here, first of all, like if the test lock type is a dungeon, like maybe if flag of test lock type and like allowed to, or like, covered types or something, right? And then we make a covered types thing that's like flag of dungeons and item rooms for now. Nothing else. So if we see that this is something we want to cover, right? So one of the things that we want generators to touch. Then we take that P and we add it to our summary. So like summed type count equals 0, or summed lock count equals 0. So we'd take an average. Is what I'm saying. So we'd sum up a bunch of these. We'd basically say like, we'd sum them up and we'd say if there's no one overlapping or not very many, or maybe we weight them by overlap. So like maybe we do like a weight, this kind of thing. So we do something like we're going to go through here. We're going to take a weight. And we're going to add this location times the weight. And the weight is going to be the overlapping generator count of this particular location. As a fall off, right? So basically, like, the higher this gets, the less we want it to affect. So it's like, as this goes up, it just like asymptotically falls off the weight that we assign, right? So things that have no coverage get the most weight, twice as much as anything that already has one, and off you go. That may not be enough. Like, that's probably not enough of a fall off. We probably want more like, like that. So it's just like really steep. So nobody's getting covered again until everyone gets covered once, kind of a thing. So I don't know. We do something like that. And then we say, okay, we divide by the total weight if there was any. Well, there has to be. So we just say, like, okay, the summed location of this generator, it just gets divided by the weight, which brings us to, okay, which I guess we apparently can't do. So we normalize that back up to a position, and that summed location is where we place the center of the analyst, and then we would say that the maximum distance is that coverage distance. So the generator radius, whatever that's going to be, maybe the generator radius is like 30 or something units. I don't know how big these should be. I don't know. But the maximum distance away can only be that much because it has to cover it. And so the minimum distance is going to be like something between 20 and that. And the minimum distance to anything else has to be something, right? I don't know that we want a separation between other generators or not, but maybe we do. Like, maybe we want the generators themselves to be spaced slightly. So basically, monster generators have to be a little bit further away from each other than they do anything else, much like item rooms. Might be a thing we want. Again, I don't actually know, but it's a thought. Then we go ahead and take everyone who actually was within the radius and we sum it up so that we place things so that people get covered, and off we go. That didn't look too successful for placement, probably because we're just running out of space for these things, which is what it is. And maybe that means we need a slightly bigger map. I'm going to set that min distance to 0 and see what happens. But that might not be it, actually. It might actually be because of the coverage picking. So it's a little bit hard to say. Like, this part here may be a problem where it just can't find anything in this particular analyst, right? Like, it can't find any place to put it. One thing I might do is let's just see where those center points are first. So suppose we don't do that. And instead we say that the placed P is just the sum block. So here are the center points, the places we would pick to try and cover. Where are those? And does that make any sense, right? It doesn't like something about that. But I'm not sure why it would complain about that. All right. yes, I'm lazy. Go ahead and tell me what that's actually complaining about. Did somehow I push on too many rooms? It is. It's just telling me that I pushed on too many rooms. But did I mess up the count? We place dungeon count rooms. We place item count rooms. We place monster generator count rooms. Right? Oh, the orphanage. Oops. Try it again. Okay. Wow. That turned out to be really crappy. So they all picked the same exact location. I suppose that kind of makes some sense because you're always going to end up with that berry center. So, you know, it might have something to do with the fact that maybe this is slightly wrong or something, but you know what we probably should do is just pick one, right? Just like pick one. So maybe do something where we actually just do if it matches and the overlapping generator count is 0, then we will pick that one. Let's see if that works at all. All right, so better, right? It would be nice to pick a random one, though. You know? Which we kind of could just cheese and do because we know that we know what the range of rooms is, right? So it's really not that hard to do. But yeah, I don't know. We probably should just do like pick random from, get a random room, and do it that way. Because this is going to pick all item rooms, which it did, because they come last, right? So we kind of need a better thing. We kind of need a better thing there, right? So I guess what I'd say is we'll fix that, but for now, yeah, we should change this into pick random room of type, right? But we need this to pick ones with overlapping generator count of 0. So we kind of need to go through them, see how many there are, and pick. Now there exist algorithms that you can pick random numbers incrementally so that you pick a random thing from a list that you are iterating at the time without knowing how many there are. You basically pick a different random each time to say, but usually random number generation is the costlier thing. So you probably don't really want to do it that way. So my guess is we probably just want to like count them. count how many don't have overlaps yet and generate based on that. I'm not sure. But anyway, from there, we can then come back to the pick lock being something that we then base the generation placement of the generator off of, right? And that puts down stuff, right? And maybe we want more generators than that. That may be too few, right? So we probably want more than that number. And let me increase that number a little bit. So maybe we increase that number to like whatever you can have is so many that you would actually have one of each here. So maybe a random number can go all the way up to there, but it cannot be less than the minimum, right? I mean, another way to do it would be like there's it can't be less than 12, but it could be as many as one for every room. But there's a problem with doing that, which is that at this point we would want to pick the minimum. So you'd probably do like min cover count, right? Something like that. So you'd say if the min cover count is greater than the overlapping generator count, then the min cover count equals the overlapping generator count, and that's the location we pick. So we always pick the one that's covered least, but if we actually overcover, that's fine. So that's going to be a problem for finding space for these guys now, right? Because they're pretty dense, which maybe is an issue. And so maybe we don't do the exclusion part of this. I don't know. But it seems plausible that we wouldn't really be able to. Because now these are going to be fairly close to things a lot of the time, right? All right. So I don't really know what we'll probably want to draw the coverage here at some point as well. But I think we're roughly there now. And we're going to want to improve these. Like, these are obviously, none of this is great, but it's a good enough start. So now that we know where everything is, those are too close together still, which is why I kind of wanted that extra separation part. So I kind of feel like min dist of 10 is not great. I'm not really quite sure why we can't find these. It may just be because our generator sucks. The like point picker sucks, and we may have to go like test it more thoroughly because we hit this a lot, and I'm not sure why. Like I feel like we probably shouldn't be, but you know, we didn't really spend much time on it. So to be fair, like who knows? We could make this try harder. But probably after that many tries, it's not going to work. I mean, we'll see. But it probably just isn't going to find one, right? But we'll see. So, I don't know. Well, that seems more reliable. So maybe it just really is just bad enough point picking, right? Okay. So we don't really know much more other than just like, hey, we've got some ways to lay stuff out now. Maybe we need to improve them, but we're not sure, so it's fine. And now what we probably want to do is just start to connect these up. So what we'll do next time is start to path through these things. And that'll be what we do next week. And off we go. Now we could also just generate a room for each of those already, but we wouldn't be able to get to them, so it wouldn't really matter, right? It would not really matter. Okay, that's about it. So let's wrap it up for now. We'll do the connection stuff next week. And yeah, that should basically be about it. I guess I should mention, if anyone does want to play around with the source code themselves, you can go to handmadehero.org, and we do allow you to get it. If you're a pre-order person, you can download the source code, and that good stuff. Also, I should mention, we are just finishing up on Molly Movie Club. We are just finishing up Nautical Month on Molly Movie Club. You can go to mollymovieclub.com. We are just now finishing up Nautical Month. This Friday will be the Hunt for Red October. And then we're starting New Movies Month next month. So August will be new movies. And the first movie, which we just recorded today, actually was Dune. And the new Dune. And man, did I not like that movie. So we'll probably cut it down to about an hour. Spoiler alert, Anna didn't like it either. But basically it's an hour of us complaining about Dune and not understanding why people like the movie. So that'll go up, and I think we're going to play, for the first time, we might actually put up also a director's cut of the podcast, because there's an extra 45 minutes of me complaining about plot elements that don't make any sense in Dune. The movie Dune, not the book. So we might also have a bonus episode for members. It's a free episode because the first of every month is a free episode, the thing that leads off the month. So that's coming up for those of you that are interested. Again, that's on mollymovieclub.com if you want to check it out. But yeah. Yeah. It's the first time I think we got a movie that we really really kind of trashed. Most of the movies we've seen we've been pretty positive on, because they've been mostly good movies. And we did have one movie that we didn't really like much, which was The Big Blue, which was a French film that we were pretty negative on, but not as negative as Dune. Yeah, Dune was the first one that's really thumbs down that we've had on the movie club, which is fun, because other people are going to be thumbs up on Dune, so there'll probably be a lot of comments about it, which is always fun. So we'll, people who like Dune will be like, no, I thought that was great, and that's fine. So anyway, that's it for bookkeeping. I'll be back here next weekend, and that's, I think, about it for announcements for now. I'll see everyone later. Have a good one, everybody. And yeah, Technic Beam, it will save you from having to watch Dune. That is correct. Take it easy, everybody.